consequences of climate change. I would encourage you to look into that more. Feel free to come to me if you need resources. I don't have all of them, but I could certainly share some with you. But this is climate change is a real issue. I think probably you wouldn't be here today if you didn't believe that. But there's real everyday consequences to climate change that I think a lot of us are unaware of, whether it's whole islands that people are having to move away from, all of which are people of color, or farmers who can't grow the same crops because the wheat belt is moving. These kinds of things are happening now, the consequences are now, and so it's hard in an event like this to say, well, how can I fix that? And so what I want to talk about today, and what most of the breakout sessions focus on, is what can we do in our daily lives and with our businesses to make a difference? And then what can we do on a consciousness level to change the conversations that we're having about this and to enlighten more people about the issues that are near and dear to us? And so I'm going to introduce Donna in just a second, but I would sort of leave you with a thought that it's a privilege to not speak up. It's a privilege to quietly go about your business doing good. And so I would encourage you to flip that script on its head, and if you are doing good, to share it. And if you are doing good, to encourage other people to do it. And social media is an amazing way to do that. So social media is my job, literally. I teach people how to use social media. But one of the reasons I'm so passionate about social media is it can create relationships that wouldn't otherwise be there. So I would encourage you, when you leave here today, to not just think about what can I do next in my business to do better for the environment, but what can I do better in my business for the community and for the community of color in Tacoma, for the communities of color across the world, and then how can I share about that and encourage other people to do the same? Because I would not know anything about any of this if I hadn't seen other people take these steps before me and do it visibly. So I would encourage you to think about visibility as you're moving forward with the things that you're going to come out with today. So last year we did like a feedback survey at the end of after the event, and we asked people what concrete steps they had taken out of the event. And the first email that I got back was that someone added pronouns to their signature on their emails, which I thought was super cool. It hadn't even crossed my mind, and so I did that as well. And someone else added land acknowledgements, which I should have done at the very beginning. We are on Puyallup land. It's on the agenda, but I meant to say it as well. That added land acknowledgements on their website, which I thought was super cool. Another office completely removed any single-use products from their office, which is amazing. And so all of these things are so cool, but if you do them in the shadows and if you do them quietly, they have this much impact, right? Like, you not using plastic forks isn't going to change the world. But you not using plastic forks and telling people about not using plastic forks and sharing in your community about great resources alternative to plastic forks, those kinds of things do change the world. So just sort of a prompt on visibility and on taking concrete steps, but then also think of yourself as a little bit as an ambassador, both for sustainability efforts as well as community building, which to me are one and the same. So Donna Thompson is going to give us a talk now on business leadership and what consumers are looking for in terms of sustainability from businesses, and who can be leaders and who should be leaders. And Donna comes to us from the Climate Reality Project. She's a volunteer there. It's a project started by former President Al Gore. And I'm really excited to hear from her. So please give a warm round of applause for Donna.
Work. And for me personally, I'm an introvert. So for me to step out into these kinds of settings can be very painful. So I appreciate that you are all here. We are in incredible times right now for our country and for our world and for our very species. And I just want to thank you for taking this time. So we will switch gears and I will talk a little bit about the Climate Reality Project. As Allison said, I am a volunteer, and our organization was founded and is still run by our chairman, former US Vice President Al Gore. And he trains people to deliver the most up-to-date version of his climate presentation that he made famous in the movie An Inconvenient Truth. And if you haven't seen that one, maybe you've seen an inconvenient sequel, which features bits and pieces of a training and some of the types of things that he talked about in the original movie. But that's where all of this started, out of the work that he was doing. And we go to a 3-day training, and he tells us all about climate change. We have climate experts, we have communications experts, and we leave with the commitment that we are going to go back to our communities and tell people what we've learned. And we're going to have these conversations, and we're going to show these horrible photos of all these things that are happening across the world. It's so interesting when you give one of these presentations where you start out and everybody's like, yeah, climate change, I'm on board, and I feel like I know something about this. And then slowly as we start to show the photos, and there's fires, and there's floods, and there's all these horrible things that are happening, and we're talking about species decline. We're losing 50% of the species on Earth, and everybody, you can just see everybody's shoulders go down in the room. It's a visible difference. But luckily, we get to talk about all the great things that are happening too. So we're seeing great gains, and I hope that you have a chance to come to a climate reality presentation at some point. I don't want to dwell on that, but I'm a huge fan of climate reality, and I have to give a shout out to our friend AG, and talk about how great that organization is. So I trained in 2013 with the Climate Reality Project, and at that time, we weren't seeing anywhere near the number of stories in the media that we see today. I mean, you can't turn the TV on or pick up your phone and scroll the internet and not see a story that relates to climate change in some way. So they're making strides. It felt really, really slow at the beginning, and admittedly, I was not on board from the very beginning either. So we're making those strides, and it's an exciting time. So that core presentation that I was talking about is very heavy on the climate science and very heavy on the solutions and those kinds of things. But we kind of had a change within climate reality and started building some working groups. So that included a women and girls working group. We have an education working group. We have a person of color working group. One of the groups that they built recently within the past year and a half or so is the business working group, or now called the climate business group. And Climate Reality came to some of our 20,000 plus trained leaders and said, we want you to put together a presentation that we can take to business leaders that's not going to get them all wound up because we're talking about something political, or we're going to talk about science and whose science is right, and should we believe this, and oh, but somebody told me this other thing. So we're not going to talk to the business leaders about science. We're going to talk about how it benefits their bottom line. And that's great for us, because when they're doing those things that are good for their business, they're also good for the planet. And we don't have to have that big discussion and that big debate. So that group got together and created this really great presentation. They have so many great facts in it about the different demographics and who is saying what in terms of, you know, what do we want from business leaders? So they're going to regular people. So their goal is to empower business leaders to take action to address their company's impact on climate change. And they're sharing that environmental sustainability drives economic sustainability. So they're staying away from that fray. Now, I was struck by the statistics. So they started this group, they put together their presentation, and they invited us to this webinar. So I show up on my computer and I'm watching this webinar, and I can't believe the numbers that we're seeing. And I'm gonna read these to you. Normally, in giving a presentation, we would have slides and we'd all read them together. But I wanna make sure I get these right, because I think that these are really interesting numbers. 2 out of 3 Americans are hopeful businesses will take the lead to drive social and environmental change in the absence of government regulation, which is really key right now when we sort of have a vacuum when it comes to environmental leadership on a federal level, just to say that mildly. 81% of business leaders are motivated to take action on climate-related issues that will benefit future generations. So we've got people saying that, yeah, we want this. And then we have the people who would be doing the act saying, yeah, we're in, we want to do this, but nobody really knows what to do. So it's great that we have this presentation. We're stepping in, we're talking to business leaders. New generations are changing that triple bottom line for business. So the old adage was promotion, product, profit. Now we're talking people, planet, profit. So it's changing that conversation, and that's part of what we're able to bring into this arena with business owners. So when it comes to those new generations, we see that they're willing to make sacrifices that future generations either didn't think about or weren't willing to make. So this survey that they cite in their presentation happens to be geared toward millennials, and 74% of millennials want a job where their work has a purpose. They're not willing to just go to the job and leave the job at the end of the day and not think about it again. It has to mean something. 62% of millennials are willing to take a pay cut to work for a responsible company. That's a big deal to me anyway. That's the big one for me. Make less money because you believe in what your company is doing. Inspired employees are 3 times more productive. And you're starting to see this picture build of what we can have happening if businesses truly were taking the lead on a larger scale. And then 75% of millennials believe multinational corporations, which isn't necessarily us in this room, but we can scale it down to where we can make a difference, have the potential to help solve society's economic, environmental, and social challenges. But only 44% of millennials believe that business leaders are making a positive impact. So we've got this setting ready to go. We just need to step into it and start making these changes. So we're trying to retain these bright people in our organizations, and we know that we're going to bring them in by taking care of the sustainability end of our business. It works for everybody. The employees are getting what they want, the employers are getting what they want, and then the planet is getting what it truly needs if we're talking about sustainability. So it's also a snapshot of our customers, not just employees, and I know many of us don't have employees. I'm a business owner, I don't have any employees. But these are also consumers. So if they're saying that in their work life, surely they're saying that in their personal life as well. So they are looking to us. So we have an opportunity to grow business while making the world a better place, and we also have a tremendous responsibility here, and that lack of leadership on the federal level just keeps banging away in the back of my head. So I kind of end my climate reality presentations after all the gloom and doom and terrible photos and terrible numbers. And then we have the great upswing talking about renewable energy with a call to action. And sometimes that's really, really specific if we have things happening in town or in the state, we have initiatives to get behind. But in general, we kind of follow a framework, and pretty much every climate leader will follow this in the end. And the call to action is use your voice, your vote, your choices. So that's empowering right there. So the idea is speak truth to power. And in our case, when we're talking about business, money is power. So stepping up as a business leader and a consumer, we're helping to drive that sustainable future just within our own business on our own. So that lack of leadership is making us look more and more not just to our elected leaders, but us on the ground. Now, how can I make money while making the world a better place? It's okay. We can do that. We're allowed. We're still allowed to support ourselves and think about what's happening to other people and be aware of what's happening across the world. We're very sheltered here. Do we have climate impacts in Washington State? Absolutely. Nothing compared to what we're seeing in other places. So it's helpful to see that part of the original presentation that I was talking about as well, to help balance out where you're coming from. So we're all voting with our dollars in the end, and that's sort of where that empowerment comes from. And anytime we part with our hard-earned money, we're saying this is where we want the future to go. So it's one of those things. Every time, you're going to go to Starbucks or you're going to bring coffee from home in your mug. Yes, it's not going to save the world. Bill McKibben will tell you, twisty light bulbs are not going to save us from the worst effects of climate change, and it's about that mindset. So in our businesses, we're thinking, so what sustainable, environmentally conscious options am I offering? Which might be kind of a tough ask depending on what our businesses are, but the ones that are acting now are going to be in a far better position later on when all of this becomes even more and more obvious. The key is not to be afraid. I know that a lot of this is very politically motivated when you start talking about climate and the background of all of that leading into these sustainability choices, but the fact is science is on our side. We know that it's us. There's no question. So don't be afraid. And another question to ask ourselves, how do we incorporate sustainability into our business conversations? Well, we talk about it. I don't know how many of you have heard of Katharine Hayhoe. She's a famous climate scientist, I guess famous for people who are in the climate world. She's a professor, she's Canadian, and she's living in Texas, and she's married to an evangelical pastor. So she has a super unique perspective when it comes to climate change. And she has a really famous TED Talk, look her up, she's really great. She also has a really cool web episode thing called Global Weirding that talks about climate change. Katharine Hayhoe. So her TED Talk is all about the most important thing we can do to help solve climate change is to talk about it. And that extends to when we're talking about these issues of sustainability and building it into our businesses as well. So we need to connect the people and the issues, and we're talking about what people care about. So she's got such a great angle on this. I wish more people had known about her. So the most important thing you can do is to talk about it, plain and simple. And like our climate business presentation, we're not talking about hot button issues. We're talking about things that everybody can agree on. So what values do my customers and my business clients have in common with me and my business? So how do we look at those, how do we relate those things to sustainability? So for example, if you run a preschool, your clients, parents, are probably pretty much on board for creating a safe and sustainable future for future generations, right? So that's a starting point right there, if that's your niche. If you have a juice bar, commitment to eating healthy, nutritious foods, that's a great starter for climate and sustainability issues. If you're a professional organizer, maybe you tend toward minimalism and lowered consumption and those kinds of things, using natural materials, not buying things that you truly don't need, those kinds of things. A financial planner, this one is my favorite, because obviously you want your financial planner to make good decisions for you. Well, this is an opportunity to open up a conversation about maybe we don't invest in stranded assets that fund fossil fuel interests. And it all comes back full circle. And obviously every client's gonna be different, and you might not broach the same things with every one of them in the same way, but they're huge opportunities to bring us to that sustainable future that we truly need. My other question, what are you doing to model sustainability within your own business? So are your products sustainably sourced? And how are you working to reduce waste in your materials? Do you ship products with lots of plastic and excess packaging and virgin paper and those kinds of things? Are you handing out bottled water at events? This is the one that gets me. When you go to a climate group and you're handed bottled water and you have to explain to them, I don't want your bottled water. Do you not know this? So we still have some ground to make, I think, in our own little bubble. So thinking about what we're doing just in ourselves and in our own business and how we're modeling that for the people around us and for the clients and customers that we're working with. So if you're in a service business, it's a little tougher because you're maybe not meeting with as many people on a regular basis. You're not worried about customers and products as much, but are you presenting sustainable options? So if you're a graphic designer, are you saying, well, is there a way that we could do this digitally instead of printing something? Or if we have to print it, can we at least please use some recycled paper and then put the little guide on it where we want them to recycle it again and send it back through the system again. So encouraging those kinds of things, the inks that we use, all of that from start to finish. So have you done an energy audit if you have a building? So much of our sustainability can come from those kinds of areas as well if we're just not using much in the first place. So that's something, if you've had TPU come by, take a look at everything, and that's something that you can use within your business, talk about it, blog about it, tweet about it, because they'll come and do that for anybody. If you have a building and you haven't done it yet, you really need to. And do you participate in programs like Tacoma Public Utilities? They have their Evergreen Options program. Anybody do Evergreen Options? Yay, we have a few. So you pay a little bit more on your electric bill, and they take that money and pool it, and they give it away as grants later on. And they just awarded 2 grants for $50,000 each for community projects. One of which happens to be Jason Lee Middle School. They're putting solar on their roof. So if you are so inclined, they have a $200,000 project and $50,000 in the kitty so far. So there's my plug for our friends with the TPU Evergreen Options. But in terms of community involvement as well. So we're not selling something. We're not trying to get new clients all the time. We want to be good corporate citizens as well. So in your life outside of your business, or when your business is the one stepping out and sponsoring events like today, are you going to choose to sponsor a festival that is probably going to have a lot of food, using a lot of single-use plastic and paper plates and styrofoam? Or, or are you going to choose to sponsor an event like today to have your name on it? Or are you going to sponsor a panel on the roof at Jason Lee Middle School? And I have no affiliation with Jason Lee, by the way. So the bottom line here is consumers are calling on us to make these changes, to model these changes, to lead when it comes to sustainability, to lead when it comes to even these climate issues, even if we're not saying the words climate change, because it's become so political. And we can make money while making this world a better place and feel good about it. We're allowed to do that. Talk to your people. And we're already voting with our dollars. So be the sustainable solution for your people when they have, how many people in your arena to choose from. Make it easy. We all look kind of the same. We all offer virtually the same products. We have a different portfolio, or we offer, this cool technique. But when it comes down to it, if that's going to be the thing that tips the scale, why not shout about it? Obviously you need a plan, but incorporate it into what you're doing. So I will close the same way as I close my regular climate reality presentations and ask you to use your voice, your vote, and your choices to speak truth to power.